All right. Islam family. Islam. Okay, so as I was saying earlier, when we was at the continental move, we chose to go to the continental move from um the land from the North Pole. All right, we was all in the North Pole, or the center of the Earth. Okay, the center of the Earth was the North Pole, and as we got from the center of the Earth, we chose to go to the continent of Mu. Okay, which is was in between North America and South America. I'm sorry, North America and Asia. Okay, where Hawaii is. Hawaii is a remnant of the continent of Mu. And when we chose to go there, that was the place of location and that was our headquarters. All right, and then from there, those headquarters, then we ventured out, and then we then ventured out to North and South America, and then to Asia, Australia, and then eventually from there, then we got into Africa and Europe. Okay, and what happened was after the earthquakes and the floods, that took place. There was many earthquakes. There have been many floods. Atlantis was not just one. Mu was not just another. There's been multiple. Okay, and after those took place, um, that's when they had a mass migration, and that's when we went from the Western Hemisphere to the Eastern Hemisphere, and that's where everybody gets their stories about them migrating into what you call Mesopotamia, or migrating into what you call Africa, or migrating into what they call Al-Qiblan or Europe. Okay, they didn't start there. None of our brothers and sisters started in Europe, okay, or in Mesopotamia, or in Africa. We all started here in America and on the Pacific island of Mu, Easter Island, Hawaii. That's where we all started from, okay? And then what happened was after this mass migration, because of the submersion that took place, our brothers and sisters, the more brothers and sisters who got submerged, we wanted to bring them back, okay? But we knew we couldn't bring them back physically because we were vibrating at two different vibrations. You see what I'm saying? I'm in harmony and balance and in peace. So I can only manifest through me someone who's of the same yin vibration or similar yin vibration, similar karmic vibration. It has to be similar. Okay? Without that, you know, like someone whose karma has been doing is not aligned with my karma, they cannot manifest through me. All right? It doesn't work like that. So because of that, that's when we did our experimentation to rebalance out the plane. Experimentation that we did with, how can I say, the experimentation that we did with mixing our DNA with the chimpanzee's DNA. Okay, and when we did that, and that gave rise, that mixture is what we now call our European brothers and sisters. Okay, and that the as you could say, the genetic experiments happened in Mexico, according to the stories and the research that I was told. All right, and then from there, then they was transported to Brazil, or you call it Amazon. Okay, that's where you get the story of Tarzan, Patagonia. Right, it was hot down there. And then from there, then it was transported. But since it was hot, it was perfect for the experimentation because it was hot. Because hot is the perfect condition for life. Life really doesn't breed in cold water and cold climates. I mean, some does, but majority of it you need water and you need heat. Okay, so it was the perfect place for the experimentation. Okay, and it's just that when they got to a certain stage of evolution, we saw how the sun reacted to their skin, and we after we saw that how the sun reacted to their skin, we were like, oh, okay, no, we get it now. You know what I'm saying? We were like, oh, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. You know what I'm saying? We recognized they couldn't stay there, So because they could not stay there, they were like, all right, cool. Well, we're gonna transport our brothers and sisters to a cloudier climate where they can evolve. Okay, and that cloudier climate was Europe, what you call Turkey, or Greece, or Italy. All right, the Caucasus Mountains. That's where we transported our European brothers and sisters, and that's where they evolved there. All right. And when they got to another stage of evolution, when they was ready to be reincorporated back into society, then it was up to the Moors there in Europe and in Africa to reincorporate them back into the family. Okay. Now, what happened was, as the Europeans began to be reincorporated back into society, okay, you got to understand that the European sisters was primarily being used to mix in with the Moors, right? Because there were no European men at the time, and the European men that were there, they wasn't really, you know, really focused on that at the time. That wasn't a priority, okay? And so they was primarily made, not made, but they're primarily to bring back into the corporation was to mix back in with the Moorish men, okay? And the European men there who got reincorporated back into society as workers. They need to learn how to build. Like they used to learn how to build the ships, learn how to build houses, learn how to garden, things like that. They had to learn how to do these activities. That's how they got brought in through the military. And through the military, they rose up to the ranks like Julius Caesar. Before that, it was Alexander the Great, right? Alexander the Great. And what they were doing was they was trying to um, enter back into the worldwide commerce and trade. They were trying to enter back into it on terms that were suitable and beneficial to themselves. And what began to happen was the Moors in Africa and the Moors in Europe did not necessarily agree with that. Like the Assyrians, you call Assyrians and Hannibal Bay, you know, the descendants of, not Hannibal, but the descendants of, uh, uh, um, you call my brother in Saudi Arabia, Hammurabi Bay, the descendants of them, Nebuchadnezzar, right? They all was like they're the Assyrians, and they didn't really agree with that. So that's when Alexander the Great had conflicts to work their way into the business of commerce and trade, so they can trade food, get commodity, get resources, and they can govern for themselves. Okay. And then later on, that conflict continued with Julius Caesar. Okay, Julius Caesar was then in conflict with Hannibal Bay from Carthage. You know, right? They was trying to enter in on the trade in the Mediterranean with Crete. All right, and Hannibal said no. Right, we'll take care of that and we'll supply you with everything that you need. And he didn't like that, so then they got to another conflict. Okay, that's how that's how the conflict started back again. Okay, and then um, eventually, there was an agreement, a treaty that was made, and the Europeans were allowed to do commerce and trade in certain regions in Kublai and in Saudi Arabia. Okay, and then eventually you had the Europeans branching in, right, and branching into Spain and Europe and France and Germany, right, after Rome, right, with the Vandals and the Visigoths and stuff like that. And then what happened after that was the Moors from Europe then went up into Spain, right, and began to try to re-civilize or reincorporate the Europeans back into the fold under certain terms and conditions. And of course, some of the Visigoths was not trying to hear that at the time. So then there was some more conflict that was going on right there. And then eventually, they came to some sort of agreement. Okay. And after this agreement, they came up to this agreement. Then they was like, all right, cool. Now they was like, okay, now the Europeans have some say so, but only in a certain area. And then that's when the Moors primarily was up into Spain and France and England and Germany. They was running Europe from about 700 to 1492. That 700-year period. All right, the Europeans call it the Dark Ages, but it's really the Moorish Ages. It was the time when the Moors was running Europe. All right, and the King of England was a Moor, King James, and all of them, the Stuarts, the Irish, all right, the Picts, the Druids, they were all Moors. All right, and then you had the Moors in France with King Louis and all of them, and then you had the Holy Roman Empire, right? In Germany, it was the Moors. All right, then you had the Moors in Spain. So you had all of these Moors, you know what I'm saying? And then you had the Moors in Sicily, what you call it, Italy. So you had the Moors was running all of this stuff, right? And then what began to happen was that the European brothers and sisters, what happened was, as the Europeans begin, you know, begin to study the science, begin trained in the science, then they are beginning to want to do for themselves. Okay, and what happened was, how can I say, some of the Moors was like, okay, we don't mind that, you know what I'm saying, but under certain terms and conditions. Okay, and some of the Europeans liked that, some of the Europeans didn't. So they was like, okay, so this is primarily when some Moors make agreements with some Europeans, right? With you call them the houses of Spain. You call it um, what's their name? The sister and the brothers from Spain. They married their houses together, and then they eventually asked the Moors in Spain to leave Spain, right? And either leave Spain or convert to Christianity. So the Moors who did not want to convert to Christianity, they went back to Al-Qibalan, Africa, and some of them went to America, some of them went to England, Germany, and Russia, but they had to get out of Spain and Portugal. Okay, and then some of the Moors who didn't want to leave just converted to Christianity, and then they were classified as Spaniards. Okay, it wasn't called Moors anymore. And then those Spaniards who converted, they are the ones who became the Spanish explorers. You see what I'm saying? Because that's what they was already doing. They're just not doing it on behalf of the church and on behalf of Spain. You see what I'm saying? So that's what's going on. So that's what happened. So you see 1492, that's when the Moors either converted to Christianity and began to become navigators and workers on behalf of the Europeans in Spain, or they went back and went to Africa or went to America or went to England or some other place. Okay, this is what happened. Okay, so it's very important to understand these truths and very important to understand these truths. Okay, and not to ever forget that. And then eventually, now we got 1492. Then 1492, then that's when you get Christopher Columbus, who was also a Moor, have permission from the Moors to travel to America. Okay, and of course they didn't even know America existed, but they heard Christopher Columbus, according to what I've heard in my research. Christopher Columbus heard a conversation about the Moors talking in Spanish about their brothers and sisters on the other side of the Atlantic, and he was interested in venturing out that way. And so, of course, Queen, not Elizabeth, but the Queen of Spain at the time, she did not want to fund the voyage. So it was the Moors who helped fund the voyage, and then that's the group of Moors who went to, what you call that, Cuba. All right, well, Columbus. And they made a deal with the Moors in Mexico. Remember, they're not Mexicans, they're not Indians. They're just Indian is a term that they use to explain people who are not people branches of the family who are not Europeans. All right, not Asians. All right, dark-skinned brothers just like me. All right, conducting themselves in their own way. All right, so they made a deal with their brothers and sisters in Cuba, and then eventually Cortez did the same thing in Mexico with Montezuma. Okay, and then eventually in 1500, 1600, there was treaties and agreements that was made that allowed the Europeans to do commerce above Florida. Okay, and eventually into the brothers and sisters you call now in Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, Canada, and then Canada was primarily occupied by France, King Louis and them. All right, so it's very important to understand how all of this stuff plays together and ties in together. All right, our European brothers and sisters are here under certain terms and conditions. They got here to establish a colony. Yes, they said religious freedom because that's true. A lot of our brothers and sisters did. How can I say this? A lot of our brothers and sisters did venture here for the purpose of religious freedom. All right, because when they was in Europe, England, Spain, France, they had to answer to the Pope and the Church. So that to get from under that, they can be here and they can practice whatever they want because they wouldn't be under the thumb of the church. Yes, they still have to follow the instructions because it's a colony from the church. So you had the English colonies, that's the 13 colonies. Then you had the British colonies, that was Canada and a little bit of Louisiana, right? The middle portion, Mississippi River. Then you had the Spanish colonies of Cuba, Mexico, all right? So these are the colonies. Colonies are corporations, businesses, joint stock corporations. So they established these businesses, okay? And, through all of the treaty agreements that was made with the Moors, they was allowed to conduct commerce and trade here in America, okay? And it's very important to understand the whole true story, okay? And not just take what is being handed to what's being disseminated in the schools and the churches, all right, because that's false information. That's not the truth, okay? There are no documents anywhere that proves that the Europeans ventured here and there was nobody here and they ventured here on their own free will and they established a nation. They did not, and I understand why they say that because they would like people to look at it like that. But the truth is that is not what happened, family. That is not what happened at all. Okay? Our European brothers and sisters was ventured here under the permission, the church gave them permission. Then King James signed the Charter of Virginia. Alright? And then you had the King and Queen of Spain at the time, who was also a Moor, King Charles, Carlos Quintos. Alright? They were given permission to do commerce and trade in the islands. You call it the West Indies, Cuba, and then later on in Mexico, Brazil, things like that. And then you had the French colonies from France, King Louis and them. They were also given permission, all right, to come into America and to, establish themselves, establish a corporation in Canada and on the Mississippi River. Okay, they were given permission by them, but once they got here, they had to get permission from us, the Moors here in America. Okay, they had permission from them to travel. All right, but the thing that is not being included is understanding the fact that the Moors were given permission by I mean, the Europeans were given permission by the Moors from Africa to travel the seas, because the Europeans just could not get on a boat from England and travel to America. They didn't have no authority to do that. They didn't have no permission to do that. They didn't have no knowledge of how to do that. So the Moors in England, and then primarily the Moors in Africa, Morocco, Tunis, Algiers, Tripoli, who gave the European brothers and sisters permission to travel the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean to travel to America. Okay, and then once they got to America, then there was an order put in place by the Moors here of where they can live and how we do business here based on principles, our system that we have in place here. Okay, and um, this is lined out in the book of diplomatic relations with the United States and the Barbary powers, or the Barbary conflicts. And that is what you call the Moors, not the Arabs, but the Moors who was, how can I say, occupying Morocco, Tunis, Algiers, and Tripoli. That's what all those treaties are. All right, Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Morocco, Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Tripoli, Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Tunis, Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Algiers, where they can, with England and Spain and Ireland and France, right? So they can travel, all right? And without that permission, many Europeans were being seized, their ships were being seized and brought back to Africa, and a market was then opened up where Europeans would be, either they'll sit there and work at the market, or they'll be transported to somewhere else where they would continue to work out, right? Until proper funds was there where they can then be returned back or be sent back to Europe or America. And this was the system that was in place. Okay? They completely neglect that whole, they don't tell people about what happened in the Barbary conflicts, because that would put the pieces together when the Moors, like, or more falsely called blacks and Indians and Africans, and they said, how we get in this situation? And I'm like, well, it's the treaties. Okay, we signed treaties with our European brothers and sisters that allow them to do commerce and trade. So it's basically all based on genetics. Are you an Aboriginal to America? Because you have treaties here too. Whether it's the Treaty of Lenape, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, Seminole, Abenaki, Wabanaki, right? With the treaty of from the Moors in Africa, where you got Morocco, Tunis, Tripoli, Algiers, right? Oh, what branch of the family are you with? Or are you Moors from Europe? Now the Moors in Europe, the King George, who was in France and Germany, right? You gotta understand that, all right? They were Moors, but what happened was the King of England and the King of France and in Spain and in Germany, they were all removed from their seats of authority, and then Europeans put themselves in that position because how they were treating the European brothers and sisters. All right, you had the English Revolution, had the French Revolution, Spanish Revolution, and the German Revolution. German Revolution was the Holy Roman Empire. It got, just dissolved, I guess you could say. All right, and all of this happened around the 1500s, 1600s. It really happened in the 1800s. That's when the changing of the seats took place. All right, and same with over here. But in England, you could say 1500, 1600. France, you could say, 1600, 1700. Same thing with Italy. Same thing with Spain. All right. It's around this time, this is where the transition was being taken place with Napoleon and all of that. All right, because the Moors were eating good and living good, but some of the Moors weren't always treating the Europeans with equality and respect either. So the Europeans revolted, right, and pulled them out their seats and then put themselves in their seats, but they kept their names. And then they made up fake genealogy. gene, gene charts, genealogy charts that said they're attached to the family when they really weren't, right? Like Queen Elizabeth, she's not really the Queen of England because her line doesn't come from England. The line in England are the Irish or the Stuarts. Her line comes from Germany. So her line came from King George, who was in Germany. So what happened, how Queen Elizabeth got in that seat is when the English Revolution happened. The Stuarts were then removed from that seat. And they said, okay, the only place you can't be a Catholic and hold this seat. You got to be Protestant. So they removed the Stuarts from that seat and then brought in a cousin or a nephew, a family member from Germany, and brought him into England. And that's King George. And then he was on the seat. And then he held that title. All right? And then from King George, then and you had Queen Charlotte. She was also immoral. And then from that line, then you go all the way down, and then you eventually get to Queen Elizabeth. All right? So it's very important to understand all of this truth, what really happened, what's really going on, all right, and how the Europeans got in the position here in America. All right, this is just a brief summary. I'll go into details later. This is just a brief summary of everything that happened and why it happened the way that it happened. Islam. So it's very important to understand this. And then when they got here, the Europeans were taught and trained by the Moors here, falsely called Indians, what you call Lenape or Delaware or Iroquois, all Moors, right? And when they got here, then we created the Constitution where the Europeans could do commerce and trade with. Because before that, they had no representation without taxation. They had no representation in Parliament, so they could not speak. They had to just do whatever that was told. All right, whether it be a plantation owner all the way down to the plantation worker, it didn't matter. They had to do what they were told to do, how they were told to do it. Okay, and that way is functioning didn't go nowhere. Right? Some people say slavery doesn't exist anymore. Well, slavery didn't ever exist, but it is what you call indentured servitude is still in place because that's the business is. It's all about indentured servitude or involuntary servitude. Okay, that's still in place. That didn't change. Islam. It just got reorganized in the 1800s. All right, Jefferson and the Barbary conflicts, 1803. Louisiana Purchase, 1803. Right, the Treaty of Paris, 1787. Then they began to branch beyond the Rocky Mountains. I'm sorry, not the Rocky Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains, into Ohio, into the right, West Virginia, Tennessee, all these areas. But they really didn't have no authority to do it. But they did it anyway, and treaties were made as they went along, right? Then, and when you had Lincoln in office, Lincoln was trying to bring the Union together. You know what I'm saying? But some European brothers and sisters wasn't with it. They was like, hey, I got my own thing going on. I'm not trying to be a part of that. So they seceded. They stepped away from it. And Lincoln tried to force it back together. And that's what your civil conflict was. All right. And then out of that civil conflict, then that's when you get the infiltration. Because this is a republic, not a democracy. Okay, that's why we see the Pledge of Allegiance. We say to the republic to which to stand, not to the democracy to which to stand. A democracy was brought in 1865, 1871, right? And then Washington, D.C., right, got incorporated, right? And then you have the Reconstruction, where they was creating this false history, right, to be disseminated. And then that's when you have 1903, the Rockefeller education system, where the system was going to be disseminated into the schools. And then they had the bankruptcy of 1913, 1923, 1928. And now they're doing functioning 100% on credit now. Credit cards, where everyone's pre-approved already. He just needs you to use it. It's based on people using it. If no one uses it, then it automatically it goes away because there's no value. You see what I'm saying? As I understand this truth, and it's very important for our brothers and sisters to understand that, and not to get upset when they see their European brothers and sisters do what they do. They don't want to do it, and they don't like to do it. But it's it's this order, it's this system that's in place, and we're trying to help them through this system. All right, work through it. All right, with principles, with peace, with government. Okay. Remember, the government is the Moors. The European brothers and sisters are not the government. They don't have a nation. They have a corporation that functions with a governmental platform, but is not a government. All right. The European brothers and sisters are not the government. The Moors are the government. Okay, and it's the Moors' job to uphold it. And that's why the European brothers and sisters can lie and cheat and steal, and they don't have to. Some of them are not necessarily upholding the oath because they don't have to. It's not mandatory for them. But it's mandatory for us to do it because we created it. We got to uphold this oath. It's our responsibility to uphold this oath. Okay? So it's very important to understand this and understand this. Try to get a lot out there. Alright, it's been about 30 minutes again, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this part up. This is probably part 2 or like portion part 3. So I'm going to continue on with this story the next time. We'll get in more details later. I wish the family the best. Alright. Peace and love as always, family. Peace and love. Islam. Islam.